Car sharing is one of the best side hustles out there. The only problem is that depending on how many cars you have, it can become very time consuming very quickly. But what if I told you that there was a car sharing platform out there that allows for you to scale and grow your fleet 100% passively? Well, in this video, we're going to be talking about just that because I'm going to be sitting down with an interview with Danny, a Colorado-based car sharing host on the platform Fluid. He has an 11 vehicle fleet that he runs nearly 100% passively. So without further ado, let's dive into the interview. All right, so I have Danny Dupre here, and he is a Fluid truck host, and he runs a nearly 100% passive car sharing side hustle. Danny, it's wonderful to have you here.
Aubrey, thank you so much for the opportunity.
So let's kick off this interview and let's kind of dive into doing an introduction for yourself. Can you also do an intro to what Fluid is? Because I know we talk a lot about car sharing, get around, Turo, some hire car on this channel, but I've only made a couple of videos about Fluid, and I think they were like 6 to 8 months ago. And so can you do a intro to yourself as well as give us a synopsis on what Fluid is?
Absolutely. So again, my name is Danny Dupre, and I'm the best way to explain it is I'm a car guy. Been passionate and interested in the car industry ever since a young age, and it's my career, and it's been an area that I've always had a strong passion and interest in. My background actually relies both in work for taking different jobs with Carvana. I've worked for a company called Blinker. And then actually Fluid Truck, I've not only been a host with, or what they call FVIP, but also worked for them for a short stint as well. And so myself personally, I love owning vehicles. I like the knowledge of it behind it. And so when I actually discovered Fluid back in 2019, for me, it seemed kind of like a no-brainer because there was this small startup opportunity in Denver that basically incentivized individuals to create a small business that was entirely passive income and go find vehicles and we'll rent them out in our platform. And again, that was the early stages of it. So Fluid Truck has actually morphed from what used to be Fluid Marketplace, which was founded in the mid 20 teens. The CEO himself, actually, apparently the legend has it that the CEO was on a business trip and needed a bow tie for an event he was going to and didn't want to buy one, just wanted to rent one. And that's where he came up with the idea for Fluid Marketplace, which took its first form again in the mid 20 teens. And the idea behind it was that you could put any item that you owned to be then rented out by, a hourly, daily, or weekly cadence to anyone in your local area. And that was anything from, like your lawnmower to power tools to just and even vehicles. And they started to actually push this vehicle side of it probably about 2018, 2019, and realized they had a huge audience there because a lot of these users were actually going for more work truck and work vans. And again, this is all pre-pandemic. And so we had just started to go into the last mile delivery phase. And small businesses were just starting to get into a lot more of the drop shipping and all the Amazon sides. So in 2019, actually, Fluid switched over to becoming strictly Fluid Truck and has now built its entire business model on this whole platform. And the simplest way to put it is that Fluid is a peer-to-peer vehicle sharing app that focuses primarily on small businesses and last mile delivery drivers. So the best way to put it is it's the Turo for small businesses, and again, the Amazon or FedEx, DHL, and so on. So I myself am what you would consider to be a Fluid FVIP, which is the Fluid Vehicle Investor Program participant. So I've been ingrained with them since 2019, and started off actually from a very small fleet. I had a bunch of my own personal trucks on there rented out, and then have since grown it and currently have 11 vehicles in the platform.
So can you speak to a little bit about the types of vehicles that are on Fluid? Because you're targeting, and you said small business, so it's typically commercial customers. Do you have the ability to rent Fluid as just like if I wanted to move stuff out of my house, or do you have to be commercial?
No, that's a great question. So the beauty of Fluid itself is that anybody can utilize the app. You don't have to be limited to just being a small business. My first actual use of the Fluid Truck app was when I moved back to Denver in about 2018, I had heard from a friend that he used the Fluid app, again at that point Fluid Market, to run a truck from someone close by for an hour to move a couch. And so that's what gave me the inspiration. And to this day, it still holds same true to that, is that they also use it not only for small businesses, but there are vehicles all over the country right now. And again, it's a peer-to-peer sharing, so it's very easy to do everything. Again, an app much like the Turo experience. So it's a userless or user experience, depending on what kind of host you're dealing with. But again, you don't have to be an actual owner, or excuse me, a small business owner. You can be anyone who just wants to move, or if you need a truck for the day for any reason whatsoever.
Okay, interesting. And so, can you speak to a little bit about not only the types of trucks, and this was the question I was going to ask a moment ago, and then I veered off into a different question,
You're good.
the types of trucks or the types of cars that are on Fluid, and then can you also talk a little bit about the different cars that you have specifically?
Sure. So the majority of the vehicles you're going to find right now are more commercially focused. So we're looking at high roof cargo vans. So the Ram ProMasters, Mercedes Sprinters, Ford Transits, as well as a handful of 26-foot box trucks and 20-foot box trucks, all the way down to pickup trucks. And that's more or less their bread and butter. So what Fluid actually did back in 2019 when they transitioned over was create deals with the manufacturers so that they could get some upstream, essentially some fleet deals for their vehicle investors to purchase at a discounted rate, so it would help these small businesses scale up their fleets at a much quicker rate and a much discounted price. So right now, again, the focus is on mostly, I would say, commercial type vehicles. There are like onesie twosies in terms of just rental cars. There are people who do have cars on there, and you are still able to put your own vehicle should you want, but it's not going to get as much attention as a Turo car or a hire car would, just based on the demographics of the app user that tends to go to Fluid Truck to be able to rent a more commercial vehicle. I myself actually right now own 6 Ram ProMaster vans, as well as 5 Ram 1500 pickup trucks. And they are scattered all across the country right now. And the beauty of what Fluid has to offer for its Fluid vehicle investors is that it's entirely passive. And it's passive in the sense that, yes, I do have to be, paying attention on a cadence weekly in terms of what's my note, what's my insurance cost, maintenance going on. But I myself do not have to be worrying about checking vehicles in or out. I'm not communicating with the customer. Fluid actually does an entire end-to-end experience for the consumer, and myself as the vehicle investor can sit back and essentially watch the whole thing unfold in front of me. And that includes, of course, watching the bank account fluctuate up and down, but also looking to scale the fleet and as the business continues to expand.
And so that's a perfect segue into kind of the next topic that I wanted to discuss, which is what is the process of being a Fluid host? And so can you kind of walk us through what it looks like? And I know that there are a few different variations that you can go about depending on like how you acquire your car, but can you kind of speak to what that process looks like, what the steps are, what you have to do versus what Fluid does? And if we can't cover like all of the different scenarios, you can just kind of talk about what you specifically went through in the onboarding process. Cause I know that it's pretty unique and quite a bit different than like Turo or Get Around.
Absolutely. So there's 2 different, pathways you can enter the Fluid truck realm. Number one is that you want to essentially be much like Turo, your own host. So that means you want to be able to manage your own fleet of vehicles. That's how I actually first started when I first joined Fluid on the Fluid app itself. This was before I became a technical Fluid vehicle investor in their FVIP program. So what happens is that you, much like a Turo host, is able to actually communicate with the customers. You're placing your vehicles. You're doing the entire handoff to the consumer. And again, vehicles are all tracked by GPS. So it is more or less a hands-on experience, and Fluid, of course, takes a cut, but it's much less than that if you were to go down the FVIP route. So the second option, which I've transitioned to mostly because of the time it took, is this FVIP route. And so for anyone who's interested in becoming an FVIP, it's actually very easy to reach out to their team and to join. the actual fluid vehicle investor program. I know due to a lot of the vehicle shortages recently, they have more or less a waiting list of interested parties. But the requirements to join are that you do actually have an LLC, so that all these vehicles, again, aren't privately held. And that goes on for a handful of reasons around liability and insurance. But as long as you have an LLC, you're able to actually join and then start purchasing and renting out your vehicles through this FVIP program. And the huge benefit of the FVIP program is that not only do you get discounted fleet rates on these vehicles, but again, I only have to be able to send a couple emails back and forth. They have partnered banks that you can use for financing, so you are communicating with your one point of contact at one of the predetermined banks. And then the only actual physical work you have to do is signing the paperwork for the new vehicles and FedExing it back. So it's actually a very seamless process, and it only takes, I'd say, about 2 to 3 weeks from saying, hey, look, I'm interested in getting more vehicles, to getting set up with financing, communicating with whatever partner dealer has the vehicles or the inventory at that point, all the way up until the vehicles are actually live on the platform themselves. So it's for not having a lot of work to do from my end. It's pretty nice to know that it's a whole 2 to 3 weeks, and I have located, purchased, and onboarded the vehicle, and maybe spent, I would say, roughly about an hour of my time just in email communications and getting everything all set up.
Interesting. That's really cool. And so I think one of the things about this piece of the puzzle that I find particularly fascinating is like the financing aspect, and the fact that Fluid has these deals with these manufacturers. Because here on YouTube and like Instagram, by far my number one question I get is, hey, do you recommend financing cars? Or hey, how do you go
Mhm.
about financing? And especially if you're first getting started and you're wanting to finance something under an LLC, it is extremely difficult. And
Mhm.
so, can you talk a little bit about your experience? And you may not know all of these details if they didn't apply to you, but like, one is, do you have to finance the car or get the car under your LLC? And then, if that is the case, like, what is your experiencing with the financing if you're somebody who just formed your LLC and now you're wanting to get these fluid cars? Is it pretty easy? Is it pretty difficult? Like, what does that look like?
Great question. So the financing for me was actually, same thing, was a question I had in the back of my mind too going into it, because when I first went down the original path of managing my own fleet, they were all older vehicles that I had purchased myself for cash, and so it was never an issue or concern. And I was in my mid to late 20s at the point, so didn't have a bunch of extra money to be able to go out and buy very nice expensive vehicles. But as I was introduced into the FEIP program, the deals that have been actually found with the finance companies is twofold. Number one, by having fleet licenses with Ford, Mercedes, and FCA, or I guess Stellantis, formerly FCA, is that you can get a discounted rate on these vehicles. And it was a lot more prior to the pandemic and the chip shortage, but at this point, it's to even be able to get a discount under MSRP is still a gift. Was actually quite a challenge, especially for someone who's, I have a 9 to 5, and yes, excellent credit and good income, but how am I able to prove that, I can go out and buy 2, 3, 4 vehicles that cost anywhere between $30,000 to $45,000? Luckily, though, with the banks that Fluid uses, they know that a handful of these users are essentially just individuals like ourselves who want to create a passive income stream. And
Mhm.
so as long as you can at least meet some basic financial requirements in terms of, income qualifications, as well as, verify credit score and everything else, you can start to slowly build your fleet under your LLC. And so what they will do is you will get all your vehicles registered in your LLC, which I have. But they do put you as the guarantor on it. So you still are liable at the end of the day for it, should anything tend to happen here with the vehicles. Luckily, Fluid has a bunch of fail safes and backstops for that. So it's not actually ever been a concern in terms of not being able to make a payment or run into an issue. Also, because a lot of the deals that we're getting through the corporate, the excuse me, the
Like the
Yeah,
corporate discounts?
corporate discounts, thank you, is that the vehicle itself, even with the way the market is currently going, after a year ownership, if you want to look at it at potentially getting out, which again is not recommended or advised, you're not your asset itself is still worth very close to what you paid for it a little while ago, so you're not really at any risk of losing any personal funds out of it, which is again a huge benefit of the program itself, in terms of being able to provide comfort to its users. So do you need an LLC? Yes, you do. But the banks that they partner with are actually very smart and know that you can only scale up at a certain level just based again on your own income and your own financial situation. But many banks, as you tend to hold your LLC for more and more years, will then pre-qualify you for larger amounts of loans, whether it's a business line of credit or even equipment finance. So I found myself having my LLC for a handful of years now, automatically pre-qualified for an equipment line of finance. So that's what I've done with my most recent round of vehicles, is just throw them under one blanket equipment line of finance.
Interesting. Okay. This is so I'm almost like, as you're talking, I'm almost thinking that like Fluid could be a really cool solution for somebody who is wanting to build credit under their LLC, because if you're wanting to get that first vehicle, it's typically very difficult to
Mhm.
get, especially if like you accidentally let it slip that you're going to use the car as a rental car. So you could potentially use Fluid as a method to simply grow your business credit while also making passive income.
Exactly. It's actually worked out nicely. It's a twofold, and of course, it does. It not only lets your business age and, to your point, actually grow, but it does help your personal credit as well, because it as you continue to make the payments and grow with it, it's only going to help you on the backside as well.
So
Sure.
you had mentioned earlier that your cars are all over the country, and which I find very, very cool. And so can you talk a little bit about where your cars are located, but then also the process of getting them to the different areas where they're at? Like, does Fluid ship them? Do you have to arrange shipment? Kind of like what that looks like?
Sure. So to your point, yes, my vehicles are all over the country. I have the majority of my fleet is based out of here in Denver, which is the headquarters of Fluid. But I have three vehicles in Chicago, one in Minneapolis, one in Milwaukee, and then I'm honestly probably forgetting one, but it's they're scattered. They are scattered. And what I do appreciate with being able to actually purchase vehicles through Fluid is that not only do they incorporate into the price the shipping cost to whatever market they see fit for the business need, but they also include something that we can talk about too, is the telematics and how does that all work too. So each of the vehicles themselves is also hardwired with not only GPS but onboard diagnostics, and ability to cut the engine in case of theft, and then it's they're very I guess very modern, if you will, which also allows to help Fluid with the keyless handoffs. But there's no additional cost when you purchase the vehicle through the FVIP program to add in, again, the telematics or the vehicle shipment, because part of the agreement you're signing into is that, hey, I do trust that you are going to be able to actually find the right market for my vehicle, and that you're going to find the area that's going to get the most potential for utilization, because again, it's a symbiotic relationship, and Fluid wants it to succeed as much as the vehicle owner does. So it's in everyone's best interest to make sure that it gets the most amount of use and utilization, because that's money in both pockets at the end of the day.
Okay. And as far as if you, for example, had your car in Denver and they found, and which you do, and then let's say there was need for more cars in Houston or in Florida, would they ever suggest like, hey, we think that you should move this car to Florida? Like, does that ever happen? Or once it's in the market, it's kind of just in the market and it stays there?
No, good question. So, especially during a lot of the pandemic, there was definitely a strong need for vehicles all over the country, as everyone kind of shifted their mentality to needing to order everything online. And so, Fluid was proactive to say, "Hey, look, we have your vehicle here in Texas, and we need it in California. We're going to go ahead and ship your vehicle there, and you should see utilization stay the same at a minimum or even increase." And because they're being proactive, they actually fronted a lot of the money, and did not charge the FEIPs, because to them, they're seeing a demand for it. So the demand is going to outweigh the cost it costs them to be able to ship it, or their needs. So there was no out of pocket expense to me as the FEIP in terms of being able to relocate the vehicle.
Very
Um,
cool.
and what's nice is, even I don't have, yeah, I can have recommendations on where I'd like vehicles to be sent to, but a part of the beauty of it being very passive is that I don't have to make that decision. So much like I'm not limited to knowing with if I were to have my own Turo fleet in Denver, if I know that different areas of Denver might do better with certain types of cars, or if I owned a convertible and the wintertime I should send it to California. No, they take care of all that for you.
Okay. And you had mentioned earlier like an agreement, and I know that that's something that Fluid is quite a bit different with Turo and even Get Around is there is at least to some level a bit of commitment with that. Can you go into detail about what that entails and what type of commitment you should expect to make if you're wanting to do Fluid?
Sure. So they just did do an updated version of the Fluid Fleet Services Agreement contract, which has actually been very helpful to myself and the fellow FVIPs because it helped clarify a lot of the more gray areas you'd experience because they are still a startup company. Essentially, when you're signing into it, you are looking to expect about a 5-year agreement with them. And again, and I say expect because anything can happen. As we know that in the entire automotive market, anything can happen in a matter of months. So the life expectation of a vehicle to be managed by them that you're signing into is, I expect my vehicle to be on your platform for 5 years. However, in various amounts of circumstances, we all know that doesn't happen. The only actual, I would say, the full agreement that you're going into is that 1 year you are required to own the vehicle based on the fleet agreements. So you have to own the vehicle no matter what for a year. And then that's more of a fleet requirement than it is actually a fluid agreement.
Mhm.
But 2 years is the actual contractual obligation you're making. And if you choose to leave the fluid, like leave fluid or yank down your vehicle, there are penalties in terms of fees associated with it if you do want to pull down your vehicle prior to, again, that 2-year mark.
I mean, Fluid is definitely based off of what you're saying, Fluid is definitely for that person who's wanting to make that investment into a passive income stream rather than somebody like what Turo kind of markets themselves as is which rent your extra car. Like it's not for somebody who's just wanting to make money from their extra car. It's somebody that has the cash to make that investment.
hmm Exactly. So I'm here for the long haul. Like it's definitely a long haul game. It's not something that you can and you've probably seen this too, is in the Toro world, a lot of people will dabble with it for a short
Mhm.
term. They will get their car up there, try it for 3 to 6 months and make that kind of blanket that, not knowing that seasonality, demand, all that can
Yeah.
have a huge impact. Whereas the beauty of Fluid is, yep, I'm in it for the long haul, but it also doesn't take any near amount of time it would be if I were to try to manage the fleet myself.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's a perfect pivot in kind of the next topic that I want to talk about, which is like the operation of your fleet. So you have 11 vehicles, correct?
That's correct.
And I know from like my experience with the Turo fleet is like once you start getting into like I've said a lot on my channel that like I think whenever you go from like 10 and under or like maybe 8 and under, you can manage it pretty semi-passively. Like it doesn't really require that much time. But once you get to like past 15, it starts becoming pretty time consuming. And I know that with like my 18 cars, it's definitely a time suck. And so for you and your fluid fleet, can you talk a little bit about kind of what your role is in the management of the fleet, and then also go into how much time, either per week or per month, that you spend managing those cars, if
Sure.
anything?
So that's a great question. The very short answer to that is in terms of getting the vehicles out and rented out and all the customer experience. I have ultimately zero input on that, zero control, which isn't a bad thing because again, Fluid is growing out there. They have an enterprise sales team, which they just got going up a couple months ago. Which the entire realm of that side of the business is to find new customers, and not even short-term customers, look for more longer-term customers. So that means that you can expect more or less that a handful of your vehicles are going to be rented out by the same customer for weeks to months at a time. I know I myself have a handful of my vehicles on long-term rentals that literally just renew month to month because it's a reputable, trusted business or individual who needs it for whatever reason, and they like the ease of the actual platform. So I have my own login on my own platform and portal and account, so I can see more or less what's going on a day-to-day basis. But again, I'm not the one who's controlling it or having to worry about, hey, what's going on here is like, can we get this customer to rent it? There is, there is times when, of course, like if a vehicle goes down or is in for maintenance or repairs, because as we all know, in the rental vehicle industry, they're not always necessarily driven with a lot of respect.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon that they'll have either a body or a maintenance repair that they go in for. So you'll be able to actually see, obviously in your account, you can go check through, and the fluid team has a support side for the FEIPs directly, and they're on it. They're quick. They work hard for you in order to be able to keep you updated on what the status is of where your vehicles are at. So your final question was, how much time do I put into it per week? And I would say right now I'm looking at just under an hour, and I would consider myself probably more of a more hands-on FVIP. I'm someone that likes to know, like, hey, what's the mileages on my current vehicles? I'm paying attention to the resale market. I'm paying attention to, oil changes and tire rotations. What's the cadence on that? Should I budget for, should I, in my own planning for my next fiscal year, should I know to expect if it gets driven X many miles, how many tires, how many oil changes, how much downtime, how much revenue? So, and that's all built into that hour as well. I'm very, I would say hands-on for me is about an hour of work. And I would say a handful of FVIPs probably don't do honestly anything except look at their weekly report and their monthly sales email and go, okay, great. That sounds nice, and move on.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I thought of a question that I didn't think of previously, but I'm really curious about. Is you had alluded to like tire rotation maintenance and that is the responsibility of you to pay. And so how does that work? Like, who is in charge of that? Who pays for it? And like, how is that logistically handled?
Sure. So Fluid itself will actually make the determination, of course, whether it needs tires or it's due for an oil change, and they'll go ahead and take care of that for you for all the FVIPs. We will be notified in our account that we see charges that are, maintenance associated to the actual vehicle. So the way that they essentially get paid back is that we get payouts on a, essentially it's almost a daily basis depending on when your reservation ends and the money goes through. But they will hold back vehicle payouts until you make up the difference of what the cost would have been for an oil change or for a tire rotation. And so you can see all that going through on a day-to-day basis, actually in your FVIP account.
And so is there any because I know, for example, like with my Turo fleet is we have like accounts with Firestone and we get our oil from really discounted places. And so is there any say on your end to say like, no, I don't want you to go do this oil because it's too expensive, or like, I want you to go with this oil with longer longevity or this tire brand? Is there any say that you get in that, or is it completely hands off and Fluid has the total say with it?
That is a great question. So when I was actually a part of the Fluid team from an internal standpoint, this past year, I actually helped them go through and start building a bunch of those relationships. And I can tell you that they have been looking at trying to get a lot of corporate discounts. Biggest example is tires. I've found that vehicles that I've had that have been in the LA market will go through a set of tires in as quick as 7,000 to 8,000 miles, or as long as 15,000 miles, which of course to us car owners seems ridiculous, but for a business vehicle that's, a little bit heavier and is getting driven hard every single day, it's not uncommon. So they're working on getting, working on getting corporate deals for tires and for oil changes. They're still at a point where a lot of it is the convenience aspect of it, because they've grown so much, and trying to be able to find partners that can help bring not only these services in terms of oil changes or even tires to one lot, but they're expanding at such a rapid rate. They're still at a point where they're local, what they call lieutenants. Lieutenants manage local fleets. If there's a vehicle they need to get back up fairly quickly, they'll at this point do what's probably quickest and take it to a local tire shop or to a local oil change or Jiffy Lube. And again, that's just to help get it back on the road as quickly as possible. Would I love to have a little bit more say in that? Of course I would, but I also understand the constraints of I mean, utilization is where the money is made. So I want it to be done. I'll pay a little bit more for the time of it getting done quicker than, trying to have more of a say and get a much nicer oil in there or a higher quality tire for a higher price that will theoretically last longer. And that's, it's been a conversation we've all had. Fluid does actually host quarterly FVIP meetings, and that's an opportunity for all the FVIPs to ask questions. And that's recurringly been one of the big ones, is they're still looking at making these accounts, but as they continue to expand, it's been difficult to actually nail down one partner that can, service every single area and every service that's needed outside of warranty work or body or repair work.
And so then in the case of an accident, you had mentioned going after the guest. So in the case of an accident, they would go after that guest and you would not be responsible for paying for that damage?
That is correct. There's fortunately I've heard of 0 cases where an accident or a vehicle getting damaged has ever fallen back on the FVIP.
Good. That's really, I mean, I know that that's always the biggest concern with people who are just getting started is like what happens in the case of an accident. And so, and I know that with like Turo, it's as long as you follow the terms of service, you're good. And so the fact that you're covered and you don't really have to do anything is very cool.
No, it's great that they offer that too. And I know that they have actually had a handful of FVIPs who've had totaled vehicles, and what's happened, the vehicle goes into it, and then ultimately the FVIP has made money off the vehicle, especially in this market. So what was a negative is turned into a positive.
Yeah, it is. And those I've talked about that a ton. It's always like it's never good to lose a vehicle because it's such a pain to replace them. But whenever you can make money off of that, especially commercial vehicles hold their value like crazy, way more than I would think that they would. And maybe it's partially because the inflated car market, but I'm always shocked with the value of commercial trucks.
Oh, absolutely. It's ridiculous how much and I would actually say too, a lot of that is because a lot of the commercial vehicles get repurposed at their quote unquote end of life in the fluid over to being camper vans, or there's such a demand for them that's popped up. And especially here in the Denver market, where the majority of the vans I would say are still located, there's a handful of companies that like to scoop up the older vans if they can and convert them, and then of course sell them for a high fee.
Yeah, very cool. That's smart of them. I didn't even think of that like fluid to camper van pipeline that like these
Yes.
vans are probably going through. You mentioned whenever cars get delisted from fluid, like because they're too old or they have too much mileage, is there a time frame whenever cars are delisted, or is it kind of determined on a case by case basis?
So that's another good question, because that's something that was actually still being to this day, I would say, figured out and finalized. The first round of vehicles went into the fluid fleet back in the commercial vehicles, if you will, that were purchased via these fleet contracts back in late 18, early 19 as 2019 year models. And the original model was to have these vehicles in there again for 5 years. Another aspect that's a beauty of purchasing again through the fluid program is that they come with a 5-year 100,000-mile powertrain warranty, knowing there's the expectation it's actually going to be driven more than the average American 10 to 15,000 miles per year. But within that, the one things that you just learn over time, especially as we're entering into year 3 into year 4, is that a lot of the vehicles they get driven hard. And so, yes, there's still technically a powertrain warranty for a vehicle that has 50, 60, 70,000 miles on it. I mean, the maintenance costs at that point just to do items that aren't warrantable, just general suspension, brakes, all that starts to actually accrue, and the vans start to show their age. And so Fluid does actually have a actual offboarding program, and they'll notify users if they believe their vehicle is going to be down for too much, if the condition isn't prime, because there is something to be said that having a nicer, newer vehicle is going to earn you more business. So Fluid does 2 things. Number one, they will notify you if they want to recommend to you to pull your vehicle down for any reason. And number 2, they do offer a disposition program. So that means that they have a relationship with a handful of auctions with wholesalers, and they'll be actually helping you to get rid of your vehicle. So again, it's literally from birth to grave. They handle the entire experience. Should you want it, they do offer FVIPs an opportunity to be able to take their vans back and repurpose them for yourself if you want. So if I were to say, hey, look, I want my van back after 2 or 3 years, they'll say, yep, okay, great. We'll close out any necessary repairs on it that are outstanding or maintenance. We'll close out the account together. And I can either I would pay at that point to have it shipped back to me, or I can go pick it up in whatever respective location it's at. So it's nice that they do the entire from birth to grave experience for the users who want to be able to take advantage of it. And again, use it purely passively.
So I would like to now kind of go into a little bit about your specific fleet, and more specifically, what are your like long-term plans with Fluid? Is this something that you see yourself doing long-term? How many cars would you like to get to? Can you go into a little bit of detail on that?
Sure. So, backing up a little bit, back to how when I got into it, I owned, like I said, I before I became an FVIP, I was my own host and had at one point three of my own personal pickup trucks that I was renting through it. And when I first was introduced to the team and wanted to actually go and look into actually joining and becoming an FVIP, at that point we were looking at mostly ProMaster vans or Ram pickup trucks, 1500s and both 2500s. And so my first stealth was, hey, I actually want to go into the truck world, because at that point the forecast for what the value would be based on average usage for a pickup truck looked like it was going to be, the depreciation wasn't going to be as great for a pickup truck as it was going to be for a van. So I started off my fleet by purchasing back in 2019 two 2019 Ram 2500s, and from there, let them do their thing, and was actually quite impressed with how they went. I also decided, let's do a compare and contrast. And so used my LLC, and then bought my first two sets of vans. So I was essentially running at that point two vans and two trucks. Let that run from 2019 into 20. Saw some actual just huge successes actually out of the vans, because on just a purely monetary side of it, the vans they were having more consistent use, longer term rentals. And so their daily and weekly rate was slightly less, but their usage was much higher. So the vans were starting to make a lot more financial sense. And so from there, I started to increase the fleet strictly on a van basis. But what you'll know is, I said earlier, is I actually have 6 vans and 5 trucks, because there is still a need for the trucks out there. And so what I've done is like a diversify a little bit, because I like the resale value of what the trucks are going to be at the end of the day, just based on projections, even in the crazy car market. But I also like the money that the vans bring in, because they are consistently rented out, hardly ever have any downtime. And I got to give credit to them, is that they do get driven hard, but they're not in for a lot of service outside of just basic routine maintenance. So I try to keep my fleet as diversified as possible, and in terms of what it looks like and how they're laid out across the country. And my plan going forward, again, like I said, I just had 3 more vans onboarded less than a month ago. Those are starting to get traction. Those are more of my spread out. So those are the ones in Minneapolis and Milwaukee. But my plan is that as Fluid continues to grow, see what, it does kind of become this, you get a little hungry for more. And, as more and more tax returns come in with your LLC, more doors are opened up to you, because you've become a more reputable business. That's how I ended up getting financing through equipment finance through my last round of vans. So absolutely, as we go into these next years, am I going to look to start expanding the fleet even more? Do I see myself capping out on any amount? Hard to say, because there's too many variables that I think that'll go into it. And I think that is one, attributed to what does the actual supply look like? And number 2, what does the value look like of these? And what does the usage look like? So we're kind of, it's always going to be ever changing, but I'm definitely going to continue to look to grow the fleet with time, as more and more vehicles do become available on the platform.
Do you have any, like, with 2023 coming quickly around the corner, do you have any plans for the cars that you want to purchase, or how many you're looking to purchase next year?
So going into next year, I'm probably going to focus mostly on, again, the van aspect of it, because we're seeing that the demand for commercial vans for all the last mile deliveries specific, and even more last mile than I would say small businesses, is only continuing to increase, which has been a great byproduct of the pandemic. So I want to get as much as my hands into the vans as possible going forward. The trucks are great. The trucks actually have they're all located in Denver, and they've done consistently well for me. I've been very happy with how they're working. But the vans are more or less going to be where the bread and butter of the business is going to be as they expand, because the vans have a much, I guess, larger target audience, whereas the trucks tend to be used more by small, specific niche businesses like contractors who need to move things
Mhm.
around. The vans, I feel, have a much more wide array of uses. So I'm hoping that going into next year, we're looking at anywhere between another 3 to 5 in terms of acquisition. I know Ram has redesigned the ProMaster for 23, and I've seen some mock-ups, and I have to admit, like, it definitely doesn't feel anything commercial or work truck like, from what it is. And the transits and the sprinters have also stepped up their game. So we're only increasing in quality and like the driver experience as we progress in years too.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's like nowadays you go into like a Sprinter van and it really is like a Mercedes with just a big body. It's very, very cool.
Mm-hmm. It's
And
very cool.
so, what is if you had some pros and some cons that if you had to pick something that you would want for people to be aware of about the Fluid platform before joining themselves, do you have any thoughts on that? Any pros and cons?
Sure. So I'll go with the cons first, just mostly as kind of a blanket statement here too. It is still a startup company. They are still growing. They've got plenty of little, I would say, little areas of opportunity to improve. And that's what's one thing that's always been, is it worth it to many potential investors to deal with some of the headaches? And a lot of that stems around some communication side of it. Fluid, I adore them for their ability to actually take feedback very openly, because they realize a lot of their success of the business is reliant upon these FVIPs being able to continue to purchase more vehicles. So I would say, as long as everyone's okay with knowing that there's going to be a little bit of hiccups along the way, and the biggest one being around communication. For me, its example is a couple of my vehicles. I have one that's located in Denver, but is utilized actually in Kansas. And so I've gotten a handful of Kansas City tolls that just randomly roll through. And, being able to streamline little things like that, or like get like a national toll pass, if that's even a possibility. Just minute things. So
Mhm.
know that, you will, nothing's perfect, of course. And again, it's a startup that has a very strong niche market, and they do want to actually get as much of their input from the vehicle owners as possible, because they're probably, as we all say, they're too close to it to be able to understand what the general public might want to know from a day-to-day basis. So the cons are essentially just understand there are going to be hiccups. It is a startup. From the pros side, honestly, I'm aware that when I got into it, I was like, this is a huge, like, there's a risk associated with this, because I created this LLC. I obviously, I mean, I can pay for them, and everything that I'm seeing makes me assume that these will pay for themselves easily, plus bring revenue in. But there's obviously a little bit of a scare factor with that. With the way that the utilization is going, I would encourage people not to be hesitant to reach out to the Fluid team to see if they can get on the FVIP list. It is a phenomenal way to get some passive income going on it. Plus, with the way vehicle pricing is going, even after 3, 4, 5 years, you still own an asset. And should you be savvy enough to want to work, sell it yourself for more money, great. Should you want to utilize their program to sell it at auction, also fine too. I love it because there is really, to me, from where I sit as an FVIP, essentially entering my fourth year with them, I have no concerns financially in terms of them, of something going wrong. I've learned more or less what's a normal cadence for maintenance. Tires, you always budget for that appropriately, but I know what to expect, if you will. I know a lot of people don't. So it's been a great passive income source. It obviously has helped my credit personally and for my business. And as someone who likes cars and is a car guy, finding a new revenue opportunity that's about owning more vehicles which was the initial draw, is still there. And it's still fun to be, saying, hey, look, I just bought a handful of more vehicles and I don't really do much and they make me money on a day-to-day basis.
And as you're talking too, is I imagine there's a huge tax benefit as well because of like the commercial vehicle aspect of the equation. So I think that that's an interesting angle. I mean, listening to you talk about it gets me thinking like how it makes me honestly want to look at joining Fluid. It sounds just the idea to be able to add cars to your fleet, having the ability to improve your credit without having to actually manage the cars yourself. I mean, there's some big benefits to it.
Absolutely. It's fun to like, even on the tax side of it too. And again, I personally, I'll admit, once I hit 5 vehicles, I was not about to waste my own time. So I do actually have a CPA who works with me and manages all that, but there are tax incentives to it. And this actually brings me up to another point that I should have brought up earlier too, is the budgeting side in terms of things you got to plan for, much like yourself. And to plan for is like my LLC, I run out of my home state, and there's fees and cost registration that's associated with that.
Mhm.
And yes, you're paying for it, and yes, I'm aware of that. But my CPA obviously can see that as, and write off the vehicle's depreciation on a certain schedule that offsets most of that. So it ends up working to be a huge financial benefit, even going into the new year's, is that you can almost expect that it's going to work out in your favor, regardless
Yeah.
of what you've paid.
We have one final question, and this is the question that I know a lot of people want to know about, and it's about how much you make. And so, if you don't mind, can you talk a little bit about how much your cars make, either on a per car basis, or if you don't mind sharing like the fleet vehicles, whichever you prefer, and then what roughly your kind of take home pay is after Fluid's taken their cut, after the maintenance, and after all expenses have been paid?
Sure. So just to give to give this very simple answer, each vehicle itself makes anywhere between, and this is net profit. This is after payment. This is after insurance. Generalized costs. So like adding in that I know that I'm going to pay 2 times a year for tires and oil changes. So on average, vehicles make about $250 to about $350 in just profit per month. And again, if there are a handful of FVIPs who have bought their vehicles cash, so I mean, to them, that's the perfect world scenario, is to be able to actually continue to make, flip up, if you will. So right now, I would see, with my fleet, a bad month of total income, if you will, like, so gross income will be $6,000 to $7,000. And then at the end of the day, I've seen my best months have been 10 to 12,000 gross. And then again, taking away all costs, I'll make anywhere between, a terrible month is 15 to 1800, and a good month can be about $3,000 in net profit at the end of the day.
Which is really solid because like I go back to like I of course buy most of my cars cash, and so it's a different scenario, but I go back to my Maserati Ghibli, which was financed, and
Mhm.
after insurance, tires, I mean, I think I don't know the number offhand, but it was about $200 to $250 as well, and we had to do all the work for it. And so the
Yep.
fact that you're making that without having to do any of that work, that's huge.
It is. It's honestly, finding Fluid has been an actual, a gift, if you will, in terms of taking a risk on this new company. And I think that it's not too late to have anyone who's interested to reach out to their team to see if, again, they're opening it back up to new FEIPs. But to your point, for hardly any amount of effort, and it's building my credit. And again, I just essentially spend an hour a week going through the reporting and just planning, but it's fairly simple, all things considered. So for a passive income source, it's definitely an A+.
Very cool. But Danny, I appreciate you being here. It was wonderful talking to you, and we hope to maybe connect in maybe 6 months to a year to see what the update is on the fleet.
Pleasure's truly all mine, Aubrey. Thank you for the opportunity, and really glad that we could spend some time together to discuss it.
So you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I'm not gonna lie, after I got off this call with Danny, my brain was going like a mile a minute, thinking of all of the different ways that I can use Fluid to grow my business. I think that the opportunity is huge. I even sat down with HP and we started looking up vans and trucks, so don't be super shocked if you see a fluid vehicle added to this channel next year. But if you guys have any questions about fluid, or if you have questions for Danny, be sure to reach out to him. His contact information is in the description below. And if you guys want to see more content like this, where I sit down and interview people with successful car sharing fleets, successful side hustles, be sure to leave a comment down below what your thoughts are on this style of content. I really want to start doing these interviews more often, maybe once or twice a month. So if you guys have any feedback, if you have any topics that you would like to be covered in this style, make sure to leave a comment. But like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I'd love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.